Good evening. It is 5:30 p.m. on Wednesday, September 8, 2021. And this is a special meeting of the Sandpoint City Council. I now call to order. And we are, by the way, in council chambers at City Hall, 1123 West Lake Street. I am Mayor Shelby Ronstadt presiding. We also have council members Shannon Sherman, Deb Rule participating remotely, Joel Aspiro, Kate McAllister, and Andy Grote. Councilman John Darling is absent this evening. We'll now recite the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I want to start with some comments. First of all, as I'm sure all of you are aware, it was reported on the front page of the paper this morning. Hospitals have, actually it's been reported for the last week, hospitals in Idaho are filled to capacity. As a result, Idaho has activated crisis standards of care for the first time in its history. And that's for districts 1 and 2. We're in District 1, of course, here in North Idaho. And why is that? Idaho, as I'm sure you also are aware, is among the least vaccinated, has one of the lowest vaccination rates in the nation. So why activate crisis standards of care? It's because there's more need, there's greater need than we have capacity to serve. The goal of crisis standards of care is to serve as many people as we possibly can and to save as many lives as we possibly can. So what does that really mean for the rest of us? Well, it means that if you're in critical care, you're going to get attention. If you have an elected surgery, or maybe a need that's not life-threatening, which most needs are, you're going to have to wait until there's time and space, there's staff time and space. So staff, we're understaffed, our hospitals are understaffed, there are not enough beds, they're running out of oxygen, they're running out of ventilators, and they're running out of space. So if you do have the privilege of being able to use a hospital locally, you're probably not going to find the same level of care that you have come to expect, normal levels of care, because that is not possible given our limited resources. That's not possible given limited staff available. And that poor staff is now suffering from fatigue and overburn because they've been dealing with this problem for over 18 months now. And they are burnt, they're exhausted, their morale is low because here we could have been out of this months ago had we gotten to that 70%, that magic 70% vaccination rate, and we would have achieved herd immunity collectively as a community. So I can imagine how frustrating it would be to be a healthcare worker and be treating people day in and day out, watching people die like never precedented in their career. And particularly because this is all preventable. 97% of patients admitted into the hospital are unvaccinated, 97%. The overwhelming majority of people who are dying of COVID in the hospital right now are unvaccinated. In Kootenai and Bonner County, as of today, 43% of people are vaccinated. That's 95,000 people in our community right here that have been vaccinated. 95,000 people have been vaccinated. And yet not a single person, not one, has been admitted to the hospital because of a vaccine complication. Not one out of 95,000. And there's all this baloney out there about, oh, vaccines aren't safe. COVID isn't safe. COVID is killing people. Vaccines aren't killing people. COVID is killing people. 309 people have died in this community. 309 people in Bonner and Kootenai counties have died in the last year and a half. 0 have died from a vaccine. 0. 0 have had any health problems from a vaccine. 0. And that's 309 deaths, 27,000 people have contracted COVID in our community. That's a lot of people. And it's all preventable. We can prevent this if we choose as a community. We can do something about this. It's actually really quite simple. We can choose to get vaccinated. And if we did, if we hit that 70%, this would all be over. And as we keep pushing it out, the virus gets stronger because it mutates, it changes, and eventually, if we wait long enough and we push this out long enough, those vaccines are going to get less and less effective. The more we just fiddle around and do nothing about it. So tonight, we're here to discuss a 1% local option tax. How can this possibly be relevant at this time, you may say? And I've heard comments like that from the public. Well, for example, last year, 350,000 people died from COVID. Certainly a lot more at this point. Now we're up more like 600,000. But last year, 350,000. That's a lot of people, okay? Well, also last year, like every year before, nearly, almost 1 million people died from premature lifestyle risk factors. What am I talking about? Addiction, inactivity, poor nutrition. 1 million people die every year. That's an epidemic. And are we doing anything about that? Or are we caring about that? There are a lot of people that are caring about that, but what's getting all the headlines right now is COVID, not the 1 million people that died last year from also preventable diseases. And I'm talking about heart disease, the #1 killer in America. Almost twice as many as COVID last year died from heart disease. Stroke, type 2 diabetes, obesity, osteoporosis, depression. Idaho, by the way, is one of the leaders in the nation for youth suicide because of depression. And we've certainly been impacted by that right here in this community, time and time again, right here in Sandpoint. Dementia, of course, and many cancers. And all of these epidemics that we live with every year, they are also preventable, largely preventable. How, you may ask? Healthy lifestyle. Access to outdoors, healthy activity, good nutrition, just living a good life. So I would add to that, as I say, those two are preventable. And I actually think that we have a really significant role, this body up here, as your leadership in the city of Sandpoint, to do something about that. There's actually a lot that we can do to encourage, inspire, and support healthy activity in our community. There's a lot that we can do. And actually, this decision before us here tonight is one of the most important things that we can do to encourage that kind of healthy lifestyle. So it's really about providing access for us. How can we provide better access to healthy activities for our citizens? And by doing so, not only do we improve healthy lifestyle and prevent the epidemics that we see every year, like heart disease, but we also do a lot to promote and encourage health and protection from COVID. Because as we all know, we're more protected when we're outside and in the outdoors rather than in a confined environment where we're all sharing the air. So the more that we can encourage our community and our kids to be outside playing, walking to school, riding bikes to school, enjoying the great outdoors, the healthier we're going to be, the more protected from COVID we're going to be, as well as other diseases that can impact us due to poor health choices. So I actually think that what is before us tonight, considering this local option tax, I think this is very relevant to what's going on right now. And it's very relevant to our health as a community. And it's certainly the role and responsibility of this body to do what we can to improve access to healthy lifestyle and healthy choices. With that, City Council will be considering whether to put a new resort local option tax of 1% to a public vote in November to support the design and construction of 4 park concepts included in the city's recently adopted Parks and Recreation Master Plan. We'll begin with the staff presentation.
Thanks, Mayor. I'll take over from, and thanks for your passionate introduction. And Mayor and Council, thanks for the opportunity to consider this local option tax. My job and passion for the past 35 years has been projects and programs that are related to quality of life, which is a value shared by many who live or have landed here. Through a robust stakeholder input, we came up with the Parks, Public Space and Trails Master Plan that was adopted by Council in 2020. The plan is awesome. We've seen some of it to fruition through the Memorial Project. The other project looked great on paper, but funding will drive what the local option tax provides. And the local option tax is one source that would provide seed money to mix and match with other opportunities like grants, foundation support, and donations. That said, the needs of our community are huge. Streets, sidewalks, other infrastructure, and real estate. I've raised kids here, and then we all see it has been here. Those are all issues that are equally important. But I believe strongly that parks, public space, and trails are and will be critical to our long-term city future. The balance of this with our other needs is hard, and it falls on your shoulders. I again am passionate about and believe strongly in this plan will be able to take the seed money and make it grow and position us long-term for a strong and vibrant community for years and years to come. And what I'm asking for you tonight through debate is to give an opportunity for the public a chance to vote again as a supermajority. With that, I'll turn it back over to our city administrator, Jennifer, and our Parks and Planning Project Manager, May.
Thank you, Kim. Council, to cover for you tonight, as you're aware, we did a community survey over the last couple of weeks, asking public opinion about our question before you tonight regarding a new 1% sales tax ballot proposition. And we want to give you a summary of the results from the community responses. We had about 785 community responses. For those who are following community responses as the survey was going on, and this is a much larger number tonight than what you were seeing following the survey. And many of those are individuals who took the survey. When you complete our survey tool, you have the opportunity to register as a user of our open town hall system. So our system knows you. We have some demographics as to who's completing the survey. And when surveys are open, those results typically are showing throughout the survey process. And I know people come back on our site and look at those frequently. In fact, some of the data we have through the system is we had close to 1,000 views. And a lot of that is people coming back and looking at the survey results. When we've done our surveys, surveys in the past, a good number of our respondents choose not to register with the system. And so their results aren't visible, and we compile those when the survey results close. So that's why we have a larger number than for people who are following throughout the survey. So we want to present a summary to council tonight and also touch on, again, the 4 parks concepts. We've had a lot of conversations about those at council meetings, but for any members of the public who may have missed the discussions, we'll give a quick kind of highlight view of those concepts as well. Our Parks, Recreation, and Open Space Master Plan was ultimately adopted by City Council in late 2020 after about 18 months of master planning processes, as Kim mentioned. We had multiple town halls, we had multiple workshops before council, and we also had a couple of different surveys that we did as a part of this. We did our online electronic survey, similar to what we did related to the local option tax, but there also was a mailed scientific-based survey that was sent to residents in the community as well. So that we had a scientific level response to that survey, which was reflective of the residents in the community and consistent with what we've done with our other surveys. Our online electronic surveys as part of the master planning process were open to our residents, voters, registered voters who live in city limits, as well as our greater Sandpoint community, individuals living in our surrounding cities, as well as in Bonner County, and sometimes our visitors who want to be involved in a say on what's happening here in the city. But again, when we take a look at our results, we break out across those different user groups so that we're clear who we're hearing from when council is considering decisions. Within our master plan that was adopted, we had included 4 site-specific concepts, and those 2 went through several rounds of public vetting. Our first site concept looked at our existing city beach. And here's some different views of City Beach as it sits down at the city today. And ultimately, there was a final concept that was adopted as part of the master plan, which had multiple components down at City Beach, including expansion of our sand volleyball courts down at City Beach, realignment of the boat launch to the southern end of the beach, and council, following adoption of this master plan, had approved a land swap to facilitate that realignment of the boat launch with the hotel property owners for property here, which the city owns, up to the sidewalk, which the city would retain ownership for in exchange for what currently is an RV park, and where we have marina slips currently today, but they are on leased property from the owners of the Best Western Edgewater. We actually don't own that waterfront, but with the property trade, we would, and it would allow for realignment of the boat launch. It contemplated a potential site for the carousel. Carousel Smiles is proposed down here at City Beach, although subsequently they have determined, and we'll see in another concept, that their preferred location would actually be along Sand Creek in the downtown waterfront. An expanded playground area here at the beach, some improvements to the snack shack, an entertainment pavilion, which would allow for summer activities on a hard surface, as well as winter activities on a hard surface to include ice skating. And we heard a lot about that in our survey. And because we have been starting to look at vetting concepts, we've included some visuals of both permanent skating rinks, as well as there are a number of cities, including Coeur d'Alene to our south, that recently, this winter will be the first year of doing a temporary ice skating facility in the newly completed McEwen Park. And then that could be taken down in the summer months and and put back up. So again, that space can be repurposed, and it's one way to accomplish ice skating at a lesser cost than a permanent year-round ice skating facility. One of the key components of our City Beach waterfront was, our City Beach master plan was contemplating improved and expanded public waterfront and access to that waterfront. And this carries through to the downtown waterfront concept as well. So as we move into our downtown waterfront and our concept in the downtown, again, as I mentioned, it contemplated a potential site for the carousel here, really creating connectivity between our downtown and City Beach with a boardwalk that would extend here under the byway, the railroad tracks, connect over to City Beach. Contemplated significant improvements down here in a property that the city closed on and purchased in January of 2016, known as Farman's Landing, that was originally purchased primarily for the purpose of treating stormwater runoff and improving water quality here as it flows into Sand Creek. But over the last 20 years, this has been a location that's been discussed in multiple iterations of downtown master planning as a place to invest for economic vitality. We saw that ultimately in our Parks and Recreation master plan brought together, where this concept contemplates both the underground and some above ground stormwater treatment, state-of-the-art stormwater treatment, but also considers public plaza space, public gathering space, public access to the waterfront, again, to promote economic vitality. Another concept that we worked through that was part of our master plan was the Memorial Field, and we were in the midst of our previous local option sales tax, which paid for a significant number of improvements at Memorial Field as voted on and approved by our voters with a super majority. That included replacement of the grandstands at Memorial Field, a new gateway and entryway to Memorial Field, a new field surface that was completed last year. And we have seen more kids able to play on our field surface in the last year, not even the completion of the last year, than we would see over a period of 3 or 4 years due to field conditions, wet soil conditions that really limited the playability of the surface. And then finally, the last phase of this project, which was just completed this summer, was an expanded parking lot with more boat trailer parking, replaced boat launch ramp, and the addition of a non-motorized launch for non-motorized users down here, and an ADA pathway down to the waterfront. And throughout all of our concepts, one of our priorities around the parks was really taking a better look at ADA accessibility and significantly improving ADA accessibility in the parks.
And Sandpoint's first softball field.
That's true. Our realigned softball field down at War Memorial. And we are in the final phase of the boat launch. We're in design, and Maeve has joined us, our team, just in time to get this going and get the construction completed as we move into next spring with additional replacing the docks and adding additional day moorage docks, as well as a buffer and protection that will help with invasive weeds management in this area, and just creating a better experience for boaters down here. At that site. Uh-oh, now I'm really going the wrong way. Ooh. Had to mix it up a little bit here tonight. Components that have not been completed, but really are remaining last components of this concept, are contemplated dog park down on the waterfront in this area here, as well as dugout facilities for softball and baseball, and otherwise Memorial Field has been completed according to the adopted concept. Again, we've been researching, looking at options relative to dog parks in this area. And finally, in the Traverse Centennial Great Northern, what we call our sports complex, our concept in that area included expansion of the skate park facility, addition of a pump track, some improved field surfaces, including some smaller artificial field surface areas here, and consolidating and anticipated consolidating our court sports. So tennis courts, pickleball courts to this site that would allow for more tournament play at a single site as opposed to spread around the parks. One thing that we heard from the community after we had completed these concepts and with adoption of the master plan was a strong desire to see the sport courts, some still sport courts mixed in our neighborhood parks throughout the city, and not all taken out of the neighborhood parks and simply consolidated at this facility. And I think it's important to note with these concepts, similar to what we've done with downtown revitalization and some of our other projects, we started the phase of having an adopted concept. But as we're moving through next phases of final design and engineering design of the projects, there's a whole public vetting process that occurs again, where we kind of finalize these concepts and test them again with the public and ensure that we've really got the right design when we go to final design and ultimately construction. And that would be anticipated with all of these concepts, similar again to what we did with the downtown streets plan, downtown streets revitalization. So that will be a significant amount of the work that Maeve is doing moving into this fall, is public workshops around these concepts as she takes us forward to final design and hopefully construction. This is one of our sport courts that is located down at Lakeview Park currently, and through donations with the pickleball group has been resurfaced. And again, there's some desire to keep some of these facilities spread at the parks throughout the city, but certainly our plan at the sports complex anticipates additional pickleball courts located at the sports complex. We did some improvements this summer, replaced the kidney bowl down at Traverse Park, and there's been some confusion about that as to who paid for the replacement of that kidney bowl, because there was a banner up at the time that was being replaced with the 7B Skate Park Association. And one thing that we have seen as we've moved through our parks master planning is there have been a number of businesses and community-based groups that have been really excited about these concepts and wanted to see us move forward with construction and really making this master plan happen. And the 7B Skate Park Association is one of those, a group of business owners and skateboarders in our community formed a 501c3 nonprofit organization to raise money to help with moving along the skateboard or the skate park complex. And so they were, we partnered with them on the replacement of the kidney bowl surface, and they came in through funds that they had donated and paid for final sealing of that to protect that over the long term. But the replacement of the kidney bowl was done with some of our parks and recreation dollars that we had in the budget. So that was a city project. And council has approved budget for skate park design and some construction in the fiscal year 2022 budgets. So want to move into survey data, and you've seen all of the concepts. So we put these concepts back before the community in trying to assess, was there generally community support for a new local option sales tax to support parks. And with that, we wanted to get some sense of vetting priorities, because that really really feeds as we're looking into grant opportunities, as we're looking at kind of how we would do phasing. It's important information for us to have as we move forward, looking at the potential for design, construction, as well as what our costs would be in vetting those costs. Of the survey responses that we received, and again, you're going to see this consistently on all of these upcoming slides. You've got all respondents, so that's all 700 plus respondents that we have. Then we broke down what were our survey results by respondents who indicated that they live within city limits. For those who took the survey, we had a map in the survey and asked people indicate where in the city or where in this map you live. One of our challenges as we do our survey tools is, and especially with the growth that we're having in our area, everyone within this area has a Sandpoint mailing address. And so sometimes there's confusion with people particularly new to our area, whether they actually live in Sandpoint city limits or no. So that's one of the reasons we do the mapping. We had also asked the question whether you were registered to vote in City of Sandpoint elections. And we took that and crossed that data with those who reported that they lived in Sandpoint city limits. So on the right, you're hearing from registered voters who, based on the map, confirmed that they lived in city limits. It was interesting as you look when we go across these slides moving forward, that our survey results stayed fairly consistent across all three groups, really on all of the questions we asked. So relative to the question of would you support a new resort city local option tax, it was approximately 50% of respondents in all three categories who said yes, they would support a local option sales tax of 1% to fund completion of our 4 parks site plans. The remaining approximately 50% were split between about 36% who said no, and approximately 15% who said they would need more information to ultimately make a decision. So, and that again would be the intention going up to a final voter decision in November, is the opportunity to have public workshops to provide more information about what this is all about. Second question, would you, oh, again, this is, sorry, this is looking at our data another way about would you support a new local option sales tax? We also took a look at the length of time. As council will recall, our first and last local option sales tax, as approved by city council to go on the ballot, as approved by voters, was a 5-year local option tax. We know the costs for these 4 park site plans, if we were to do all components of these site plans, would far exceed the revenues that we would receive under a local option tax in 5 years. So we also wanted to get a sense of how long of a period, how long of a tax would people support. And what we saw is the majority of responses, again, across all 3 groups, ranged in the 5 to 7 to 10 year. That was our significant majority of responders indicated that between 5 and 10 years was kind of where they felt comfortable with a length of time for a local option sales tax. Another question that we put in, while it wasn't one of these site concepts, but it was another component of our Parks and Recreation Master Plan, was there was a recommendation that the city continue to look at partnering with community groups, nonprofit groups, the schools, or otherwise itself add 14 acres of developed or open park space in order to maintain current levels of service with population growth in the next decade. So we did want to ask a question, is if an opportunity came up to purchase property, would voters support the purchase of the property with the local option tax? And we saw pretty mixed results. A little over half across all three groups indicated that yes, they would support it, but it was pretty close to a 50-50 response between yes and no relative to the purchase of additional property. When we asked about priorities in the Parks and Rec Master Plan related to the purchase of property, and we also threw in a question related to Baldy property, because council will need to make a disposition decision on that property relatively soon, probably in the next 6 to 12 months. Again, that is property that was purchased for a site for a wastewater treatment facility. It was purchased by the wastewater treatment fund and the ratepayers in that fund. And so it has been temporarily used as a disc golf course, but if the city were want to continue to retain that property for any purpose, now that it has been determined that it would not be the site for the wastewater treatment plant, that property would need to be purchased by the city's general fund or another source of funding like a local option tax or grants. What we heard related to the purposes for property purchases is there was fairly strong support for those who would support property purchases for trail connectivity or to increase public waterfront, public water access. We did not see as strong of a response relative to the purchase of the Baldy property as we saw to the other two priorities. We asked, it's been a topic of conversation in the community for many years, as you know, about indoor recreation facility. And that conversation started before we had the YMCA come into town, and it acquired formerly SWAC, or Sandpoint West Athletic Club. And so we wanted to go back again and touch bases that with the YMCA in town, is there still a desire for us to consider an indoor recreation facility? One thing that we had talked about with our original planners that were involved with our site concepts as we got looking at our sports complex, would there be an opportunity for design of that complex for consolidation of courts at that location, and perhaps as a phased approach, leave that open or with some type of a cover, but ultimately create it in such a way that it could ultimately be closed in as an indoor recreation facility if that was something the community wanted and funding could support. So we did want to go back and ask that question. And what we did continue to see is there still is a fair amount of interest in indoor recreation facility, with over 50% of respondents indicating that it was important to extremely important. We then took a look at some of our parks assets again. For our concepts, we had City Beach, the downtown waterfront, the sports complex, War Memorial Field, but it really is right next door, and the dog park area is kind of War Memorial Field moving into Lakeview Park. So we asked about both of those parks facilities, and we'll be moving in this year into our recreation master plan for the watershed. And that will be another one of the efforts Maeve will be leading. So we wanted to get some sense too on where the watershed and recreational trails and recreation in general in the watershed ranked relative to other priorities. We saw resoundingly that greatest priority, most important city park was City Beach, which I don't think is a surprise to any of us. And then our second highest ranked, it was between downtown waterfront, Traverse Centennial, Great Northern Sports Complex. And We had a lot again, and we saw it move up to number 2, the Sand Creek watershed and recreational trails there. And then Lakeview Park and War Memorial Field were more of a distant 3 and 4 in terms of that ranking. With Memorial Field, again, with most of the amenities that were part of the master plan having been completed. So that's probably why you see it ranked 4th in that list. Finally, we took some of the concepts out of the, some of the amenities out of the various parks to get some sense of priority as we look at how to phase park amenities, how we should prioritize projects related to grant funding. And what we saw out of that is our number 1 amenity under this exercise was ice skating at City Beach, which we heard a lot about it through the Parks and Rec master planning process. And we've heard a lot about ice skating in that area even prior to us moving into Parks master planning. Improved expanded pedestrian pathways was second, followed by dog parks. Right with that was the realigned boat launch and parking area at City Beach. And again, really a confirmation of what we had heard in our overall in our master planning process, expanded, improved public access to waterfront, and kind of moving down from there. As the survey was moving along, as it was open, we definitely could see as user groups were leveraging members of their user groups to participate, we would kind of see some jockeying around in responses, but what we did not see in terms of changes in ranking, even as that was happening through the process, those first 4, ice skating at City Beach, pedestrian pathways, dog parks, boat launch and parking area at City Beach, and public access to waterfront, those stayed consistent right out of the gate all the way through to the close of the survey. And finally, we did receive 370 written comments with the survey, and so that the public is aware, those are viewable on our website itself if you go back to the survey, and all of those comments were forwarded to the city council members in full, so that city council members had a chance to review those in advance of tonight's meeting. And we also included a summary of those comments as well. Some of the recurring themes Linda went through and did an analysis for us on the written comments. Recurring themes were a perception that the tax burden actually is on residents, not on tourists, and a feeling that residents are taxed enough. We had about 70 comments with something along these lines. We had 31 comments specifically addressing sidewalks, non-motorized transportation, distinct from the trails. So I think that's important to note. So distinct from trails in the watershed, these 31 comments were really related to sidewalk connectivity, pedestrian pathways. 25 comments on the need to address our streets and traffic issues. And we've had a lot of conversations about that with our multimodal transportation plan. 15 comments addressed, again, the need for affordable housing. 15 comments on the need for expanded, increased pickleball facilities, and that the city has been kicking the can on that front. We heard quite a lot about pickleball again throughout the whole master planning process. Comments about considering parking fees, boat launch fees, and otherwise use fees for our parks, specifically for non-residents. And then other themes that were mentioned less frequently were concern about burden on businesses who maybe can't afford the tax. And although this is, to be clear, again, this is a pass through, the businesses are collecting it and passing through what they've collected to the city under this type of tax, and then the time for administering it. And specifically related to the time, we do have some businesses in the community that our smaller businesses, it's a small amount of tax they collect, and there is administrative work with collecting and remitting that. We had some general comments about concerns and some complaints about growth and needing to make changes in our parks in response to the impacts of growth. And then we had some comments about swimming facilities and the need for additional swimming facilities. And some of that was again related to indoor recreation facility, but not all of it was. In terms of local option tax projections, to give you some sense of a 1% local option tax and what that means potentially in terms of dollars. This is based on collections that we have had under our previous local option tax and with some inflationary factor put in there, but with the growth that we're experiencing, these may be conservative estimates. And Sarah Lenz, our finance director, treasurer, put these together, and she typically is on the conservative side. So, but she felt these were reasonable projections. So we kind of took that middle point between 5 to 10 years and looked at if it was a 7-year tax, what would that look like? And estimated revenues would just exceed $12 million, according to Sarah's projections. One thing I think it's important to note relative to these projections, and we saw this particularly with the Memorial Field project, is the local option tax for us in parks is a great opportunity for us to really have seed money and leverage additional dollars through grants and through donations, as I mentioned, for War Memorial Field. For our final 2 phases of War Memorial Field, we were able to leverage about $700,000 in grants for those projects. With the projects and the priorities in the parks concepts, we would project we would be able to leverage significantly, a significantly higher number of grants with some of the infrastructure dollars that are coming out and some of the allocations specifically related to COVID. One of the priorities again is parks and recreational infrastructure in communities as a way for people to get out of their homes, to get out of isolation, and to help with mental health and recreation. So there is a lot of money out there, including an upcoming grant cycle in January that would be significant for water access and for boating improvements. And Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything to this with timing and opportunities, but.
I think just on the Land and Water Conservation Fund and funding is becoming more healthy. I think I talked to you guys last time a little bit about back in the 80s, 70s, 80s, a lot of our local parks were built with federal money. And those funds kind of diminished. They are managed through the state, but they're coming back, and really the timing again is excellent for those opportunities, quality of life opportunities.
Did you have anything else on funding? I just don't want to skip past you.
Yeah, sure. I've just done some rough calculations, and first of all, I want to say hello. Thank you for having me. And this is just my first week here in person, so very honored to be here. I come from a background of park and rec project management from Alaska, and I've implemented over 50 projects up there, and millions of dollars in capital improvements. And initial, just a quick glance, I think that the funding that we're looking at here, give or take a couple million, I think that we could easily deliver the first low-hanging fruit projects in the next year or two. And then the bigger projects, we would start to realize those implemented by the end of that 5 to 7 year period. I feel quite confident it doesn't intimidate me at all. And I think that like we're all talking about, there is incredible momentum right now for public health in outdoor spaces. It's not trending. This isn't a trend. This is here to stay. And we've been running the numbers at the national level for 2 years now. And with that, that also comes areas such as yours, that's a resort-based area. And so the demand is even higher on communities like this. So not just keeping up with the trends, but providing a service and providing amenities that meet the standards of what we realize we need right now. And we know that, when we try to buy our sports gear at the local stores, they're sold out of everything still after 18 months of COVID. They don't have a lot of the gear. So you can see just visually by being out there in the community, you can see that things are missing, and it's time to respond to that. I think you have an incredible gem of a community. And when I look at the waterfront, I was speaking last night at the Planning and Zoning Commission, and I see that waterfront and I look at the mountain and how the gem of the city is really that waterfront beach area. And then the potential with connecting the entire Greenbelt corridor all the way up the watershed. It's just literally an ecological gold mine, really, from the sustainability perspective, but also the recreation and the preservation, and then opportunities I see from the inclusivity perspective. My mom is actually a disabled senior, and she rides an e-bike, and she can't wait to come here and ride on your rec paths. But more importantly, there's a whole community of people like that who have been raised here, who've come back to work here and would like to retire here. And so providing more inclusive access to people with different disabilities and abilities throughout our amenities are something that I'm really interested in. And then finally, something that we haven't talked too much about, but the land acknowledgement for our Indigenous communities is something that I'm very interested in bringing to the forefront. And so I think that we can easily leverage some of our asset funding with some of our communities out there and bring more interpretation, more understanding, and more cultural relevance to our community, and bring that history to the forefront, and also pay homage and respect to our Indigenous communities who were the original stewards of the land, who are the current stewards of the land, particularly waterfront and waterway areas, and in the future. So with that, I'd like to thank our Indigenous communities and Native populations, and particularly Idaho. So.
Like maybe add one more thing, and that's an opportunity for all of us in the county to participate in some of these projects financially. Our 9,000 plus or minus residents would have the 1% tax, but so would the 45,000 people who live in our county. I live 3 miles up Baldy, and so that would give me an opportunity to participate, and plus all of our visitors, which we know. And then enough said about that. So yeah.
The mayor asked us to, based on the survey results and the questions that were asked in our Parks and Rec master plan, to at least give a placeholder for the start of a discussion on what a ballot measure might look like, again, considering dollars that are available, what we heard back from the public relative to a period of time, and also what are some of the prioritized amenities, but also giving the flexibility, again, based on dollars that we're able to leverage for us to be able to kind of move around timeframes, move across parks, because one of the challenges, but great benefits with our park site concepts is they really consider what's happening at all of the parks facilities, not just at a single facility. So it's not a matter of just doing the projects at City Beach. As we do those, we need to think about what are the impacts and the related amenities in the downtown waterfront, as well as over at the sports complex. And as we're looking again at like sports courts, for example, thinking about consolidating those, but retaining them at the other parks as well. So we've given you kind of at least a starting point for conversation tonight. Again, taking that into consideration as well as the results from the survey. And Kim, Maeve, and I are obviously available to answer any questions or provide further details that the council would like for discussion.
Great, thank you, staff. Appreciate that report. Council, any questions?
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So in advance of this meeting, I had asked staff that the local option tax consider improvements to the sidewalk network, including connectivity, particularly with respect to our priority sidewalk network. It's something that we, in reviewing the survey results and the comments, came up quite frequently. And it's been a topic of conversation since I've been on council for the last 8 years, is how do we accomplish this connectivity throughout the city? And it's been a really big challenge. We have about $50,000 in this
We're
year's
budgeting
budget
annually.
for sidewalk improvements, connectivity. And if you know what the cost is to implement a sidewalk, that doesn't get us very far. And so I thought that this would be a really great opportunity to not only support, our parks infrastructure, which, don't get me wrong, I think is incredibly important, but also to take a broader approach because sidewalk connectivity gets people outside. It also accomplishes that goal of a healthy lifestyle that everyone's craving right now. And I think it would be unfortunate to not consider this opportunity to really make a dent in it. So I had asked, what would a dedicated set aside within these projections would look like, and what could we accomplish within a 7-year period of time?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, please.
Okay. I'm going to pull up our. Sorry. Hang on just a second. Got our priority. Sidewalk network, so let me. Is it? There we go. All right. And Amanda is participating electronically. She can answer any questions that council may have in this regard as well. But for council and the public's reference, and in response to Councilwoman Sherman's request, this is our priority pedestrian network that was adopted as a part of our recently adopted multimodal transportation plan. And again, it identified a number of areas in town. If you look here under our existing sidewalk conditions, after receiving Councilwoman Sherman's request to do a further analysis of this, what we did is we went back in and took a look at those areas that were identified as poor sidewalks, as well as moved into the identified network for good sidewalks. What I would note for council and the public, in poor sidewalks, in these areas, we've got sidewalks that either large sections of the sidewalk network do not exist. A kind of a quick, easy one to point out there is around here at our senior center. If you've been walking in that area, a number of the blocks immediately adjacent surrounding the senior center do not have any sidewalks. So we have connectivity within the broader system, but we don't have connectivity there at the senior area. So when something is identified as a poor sidewalk, poor could mean in poor condition. Areas of poor condition within that network are actually missing sidewalk network within that area as well. we went in and then took that poor to good and tried to look at if we were to do a set aside. And this was some discussion back and forth between really what did we think it would take in terms of dollars, given a 5 or a 7 year time frame to really significantly accomplish those priorities in the parks projects, and what could we peel off and really try to take a significant, make a significant effort to resolving our poor and good sidewalks in the transportation network. And I will pull up our spreadsheet so you can see where we landed with that, and specifically the areas. As Councilwoman Sherman mentioned, we have included in our fiscal year budget for, as adopted by council for fiscal year 2022, and we had discussed as part of the sidewalk conversation, ensuring we had a minimum $50,000 investment of general fund dollars for our sidewalk system. Over a 7 year period, that would give us $350,000 towards sidewalks and would ultimately contribute 2,000 linear feet of sidewalk improvements towards this pedestrian network, which amounts to approximately 7 additional completed blocks. We looked at the local option tax, and if there was to be a set aside of $200,000 a year over a 7 year period, that would provide an additional $1.4 million towards the pedestrian priority network and an additional 8,000 linear feet of sidewalk. And with the two combined over 7 years would be an investment of $1.75 million between local option tax dollars and general fund dollars to support the pedestrian network. And we could accomplish a minimum of 10,000 linear feet of sidewalk, or an additional 33 blocks of sidewalk beyond what we currently have. When we did the analysis in our pedestrian priority network, then the next question would be where are these areas of looking at the number of blocks, the linear feet, where are the areas that were specifically identified and the poor to good and really important priority areas. We identified 6 areas that could be completed with, if council was to choose to approve a set aside, and that would be the sidewalks, repairing the sidewalks and completing the connectivity around Washington Elementary and South Sandpoint, repairing the sidewalks and completing connectivity on 4th Avenue south of Superior, providing new connectivity to the senior center along Main, as I pointed out on the map, repairing the sidewalks on Larch between Boyer and 4th, repairing sidewalks and completing connectivity on the south side of Oak Street between Division and Boyer, and providing new north-south connectivity on one side of Ella Street between Pine and Spruce. I think it's important also to note for council and the public that we do regularly and very aggressively pursue grant dollars for sidewalk projects too. In fact, we had a sidewalk project slated for this year that we were really looking forward to. That was the sidewalk connectivity along Pine Street between Boyer and Division. And unfortunately, we were hoping to go to construction on that project this year, but with the bidding climate that we have in the construction industry this year, we weren't able to receive competitive bids that we needed for that project. So we plan to go out late this year, early next year to get that project completed. There's also a couple of grant opportunities that we'll be pursuing for additional sidewalk projects as well. I would also note, as we were taking a look at this for Councilwoman Sherman, again, the pedestrian priority network, it is a component of our multimodal transportation plan. And we did receive a number of comments in the survey. It was a lesser number of comments than and written comments than we received in kind of other areas, but there were a number of comments asking about, well, why not local option tax towards street repairs? And again, a reminder out of what is in our multimodal transportation plan, the identified multimodal projects and predominantly street projects within that plan. We have $95 million worth of projects in our multimodal plan that need to be completed over the next 20 years, which includes both pavement maintenance projects as well as connectors that we need to address the growth and the impacts on our community. And for that reason, when we look at the dollar amounts of a local option sales tax as being considered at approximately $1.4, $1.5 million a year, it is a significant amount of money, and it can make a significant difference in this community. It does not make the significant drop in the bucket for a street project that it would make with a sidewalk project and or parks projects. Our street projects primarily, we are dependent on our general fund for our maintenance projects, but we also leverage grant funds for projects, and the Urban Renewal Agency, SURA, has funded street projects in downtown, and as also SURA was created up north to fund the Great Northern Road project up north as well. So that's the reason that street projects were not considered relative to the local option tax. But as shown here in response to Councilwoman Sherman's question, we believe that a set aside of $200,000 a year, if council chose to go down that path, could make a significant difference in our pedestrian priority network and still leave enough funding to pursue the parks projects as well.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
So Jennifer, I know this might be too early to ask, but do you think that we will see any trickle down for the $1 trillion infrastructure bill that they passed coming down to us for streets or infrastructure like that? Or is that just too soon to?
We are certainly hopeful, and we've been following what are the priorities. And yes, we do believe streets. We believe it would be a great opportunity for, again, some of our pavement improvements that need to be made, as well as the Baldy connection and the missing funding piece for Great Northern, as well as other improvements. In addition to that, while we're not talking about it specifically tonight, but it has been a topic and will continue to be a larger topic, is our wastewater treatment plant and funding for what will be a very significant infrastructure cost. And so we're very hopeful that those dollars are available to support that, and believe that will be a very competitive project.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to thank Councilor Sherman for bringing that up. I think that the sidewalk component is a fair compromise. There were a lot of conversations about streets, and I think the conversations have been great, but some of our issues have been conflated and they all get wrapped up into one. Your explanation of how to parse these things out and walk our way into taking care of our municipality, that it was great. And I do think that I don't know if now is the time or the place for us to start putting a grocery list together as to what it is that we want, but I definitely think that not only is it a good idea, and it's a deliverable that we could have some potential for our constituents that might be skeptical. So maybe capturing that 15% that needed more information, or the ones that were hesitant because maybe their thing wasn't on the list. I think that this would be a good bid to try to bring them back to we're all in this together. Okay, so I wanted to give my affirmation to that, as well as, so I'll try not to rant too much, but Mr. Mayor, I deeply appreciate your statement and the pursuit of a healthy lifestyle to be lived well. For you to publicly partner those two things, I think will reach out and speak volumes to many. again, maybe we're in an attempt to try to capture and bring back some individuals to the table and the conversation and to help express that, hey, man, or young lady, or what, we are all in this together. That there's no animosity, that we can disagree, but I believe that we want to live a well-lived life through a healthy lifestyle. And I am an advocate for parks, always have been, always will be. I think that we've got staff currently right now that we can be very, very proud of, that are very competent and have delivered many, many things. We've got the right people at the right place at the right time. I know that our citizens, that I deeply appreciate and thank them for their participation in the survey. Without that, we would not have, it would just be us, and that's not what any of us want. It would be, as much as I appreciate the survey and the input, I do disagree with some of the interpretations that staff has provided for us. I do agree with the information. And that's why I want to round this out with, if this is time for grocery list items, I, for a variety of different reasons, really am, I like that the Baldy property. And I think that property purchase for longevity, and it looks like that we need some more property as well for parks or for housing, or I think that we can walk and chew bubblegum at the same time with that piece of property. And the individuals that have had the sweat equity for that disc golf course should be recognized. And so this is, I would hate for another piece of wonderful property to go away without us having this opportunity. So, thank you.
I just want to jump in here. Both Councillor Sherman and Councillor Grote, I really appreciate both those questions and comments. And yeah, Andy, I would say right now is definitely the right time. We actually are in a timeline to get this ballot approved and on the ballot in November. So I think our deadline is September 13th to have this submitted to the clerk. Is that right? So really tonight is our opportunity to have this passed in whatever form this body thinks is the right form. So if we want to, pick and parcel and add a G or take away a C or whatever on this list of priorities, that is totally our prerogative here today.
Mayor,
Yeah.
a couple things. We have to figure that all out tonight, or we're gonna have workshops and times to figure that out.
Here we are.
With
This
the
is
priorities.
this is what we're doing.
Understood. Couple things I agree with Councilwoman Sherman. Thank you for those. I talked to multiple people this past week about if they could be relieved of sidewalks and paying for sidewalks, to be more willing to add ADUs and on their property to allow cheaper rent for citizens. So I think that was a good proposal. Shannon and I approve of that 100%. So I appreciate that. Another thing, I'm not a politician. I'm up here because the people voted for me. And if they don't like what I have to say, they don't have to vote for me again. No disrespect to Councilman Grote or Mr. Mayor. I want to speak for possibly another group who may be offended by the words spoken here tonight. I don't normally talk like this, only response to things that are said, but we've had struggles with depression, anxiety, multiple addictions for a long time. I'm 34 years old. I've been involved in politics since I was about 20, and I've never heard from the pulpit here about anybody caring about addictions, suicide, et cetera, until today. I've never heard it from here. And all of a sudden, what I don't want is people to be offended, or I want to at least represent them, that to tug on heartstrings to approve a 1% tax for those of us who have struggled with depression or anxiety, being taken advantage of as a little kid, who has learned how to struggle and fight through that. There's a lot of us out there that probably would be offended by the words spoken here tonight about, oh, now we're cared about when we want a local option tax approved. Now it's spoken of about suicide or depression or death, when a lot of us have been struggling with that for a long time. So I want to just talk and represent them, to let them know that an open space, a park, although I agree with much of it, absolutely is not going to help necessarily those who are struggling with depression or anxiety, or who have been molested, who are struggling with addictions of any kind, phone, it comes down to so much about being a parent, being involved, valuing your children, hearing your children, understanding your children, understanding their fears, understanding what ticks, letting them know your fears, that you can see them. That is how, in a big way, more than open space, you're going to change the world with depression and anxiety, is loving your children, being humble, being a servant to them, teaching them, and being an example to that. That's what's going to help those of us who have struggled with depression, anxiety, suicidal thoughts. That's not to say I don't agree with open space or connectivity. I just want to be a voice for those who may be offended by the things spoken here tonight. And so thank you for your time and for hearing me out. And let's proceed. Let's play ball. So thank you.
Counselors, any other questions for staff?
I do, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
So Jennifer, first of all, thank you so much for everybody who responded. I have read all of the comments. Some were very interesting, but I thank you for taking the time to do that. One of the things that was apparent to me that people don't have an understanding about how the local option tax works. And so in the public workshops, I'm a very visual learner. Can we have some sort of graphic that shows people how it works? And will that be part of the public workshop to explain to them how it works?
Absolutely. Excuse me. Absolutely. That's pretty standard to discuss where the funding would come from. And I'm very visual as well. So yes, that will be a part of it. And there will also most likely be a website associated with each of these projects. So you can, as they get developed, they'll have information that you can receive that way. You can receive it through the workshops. Excuse me. And I'm very hands-on in my outreach. So there'll be different formats so that they can hopefully be as inclusive as possible and reach people that we haven't normally reached. So
thank you.
you're
And
welcome.
also I would like to concur with Councilman Grote about the Baldy Mountain property.
Thank you.
Mr.
Can we go back to the last slide that
Deb's,
you had up? Oh, Deb, Councilwoman Rowe, please go ahead.
I did have some comments. I would like to commend Hero for, can you guys still hear me? Because the screen
Can you
just,
say that again?
I would like to commend Councilman Aspiro for pointing out that I also have a difficulty with tugging on heartstrings and sort of connecting this to the isolation of COVID when we are in crisis standard of care and our governor is not putting us in any sort of stages. So we're not isolated. We're unfortunately living life like nothing is going on while people are making life and death situations, which was totally avoidable. That is beside the point though. I have read through all the comments from the surveys and I do have some concerns that this seems to be such a pressing matter. I'd like some more explanation from staff why this is an absolute, that it needs to go on this particular ballot. As Councilman Aspiro pointed out not too long ago in one of our last meetings, what's the rush? Why are we in such a hurry? I feel like a survey that the results then come out and I get final pieces of the presentation less than an hour or so before the meeting does not give me the opportunity to process information nor come up with thoughtful questions as to whether or not I should be voting yes or no on this. I would question why we wouldn't leverage some of this money to move forward on fixing the division section of roadway and sidewalks, especially with LTAC granting, as we discussed in one of our last meetings, you only need 7% for match funding. I think that some of the individuals that live in that area that because of the way our current economy is and our current housing situation, they may be working 2 or 3 jobs. They do not have the opportunity to walk their children to schools, that they may be far more appreciative of us making that a safer area all the way through to the library and such. So I am struggling that we have to process this so rapidly to get it on this particular voting cycle. I would hope staff could explain that to me a little bit better. I also felt the survey was in some ways very leading and had somewhat a set of blinders on. We talk about working with our partners, et cetera, so on and so forth. There's been, and how we are getting survey results from residents in the county, yet we neglect to discuss anything about what Pend Oreille or our other municipalities may be doing relative to recreation. I know that Pend Oreille has their local option tax that also passed, and they are moving forward quite rapidly with approximately $2.5 million per year over the next 5 years to build some of their recreation facilities. So I would hate to see us doubling up on things when we could collaborate with some other towns to make sure we're getting the right product for all of our residents, and putting some of the onus for the first time on another city and maybe potentially the county. And I think that the survey, because it only asked about recreation, as many people don't understand how the lot taxes work, I wonder how the results would have come out had, as Ms. Sherman or Councilwoman Sherman pointed out, if there had been an option for sidewalk or other things put in the survey, how that would have changed the result of the survey. So I have many, many questions. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Staff, do you want to start maybe with her question about timing? You can drill down a little bit on the importance of the timing.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think as we had discussed this internally and the timing relative to this, it was really trying to get the timing to line up with the opportunity to be able to leverage funds with other funding that is coming through, including the infrastructure dollars. In order to be competitive for those projects, you're going to have a designed shovel-ready project with the match funding available in order to be able to leverage that funding. And as Kim mentioned, the WIF funding there is a large amount of that coming in because additional dollars have been added to the pot, and the timing of that is January of next year for grant applications to go in. So it's not that this cannot be put off for another ballot cycle if council chooses to do that and vet through this and kind of maybe determine the scope of this further. We will be passing up what we believe will be a large amount of infrastructure dollars that we would otherwise be available to support our projects because we don't have the match available in our current budget.
And I also say that the question around connectivity, that was a prioritized item listed in the survey, and it did receive high marks. So, and that really supports Councilwoman Sherman's position to include sidewalk and connectivity as receiving line item funding from this proposed tax. I also want to comment on your question regarding partnering with the county and Pend Oreille. And I think that's a really important question, and that's the one that I have for this body as well. And that is more generally, how do we build in more flexibility into this so that we can take advantage of those opportunities as they come up? One such example is Bonner County right now is in the process of approving a land grant that would be a long-term, very low lease, like a $1 a year kind of lease, long-term for a potential indoor ice facility at the Bonner County's property near the juvenile detention center just south of the fairgrounds there. So that's an incredible opportunity. There's been a drive within this community for a long time to build an indoor ice facility. So a lot of people are really excited about that. And the fact that Bonner County would be willing to essentially donate the land for that purpose is a huge step towards seeing a vision like that come to reality. So I think it would be fantastic if the city, through this local option tax, could partner in that effort to some degree, whatever degree that this body and the public thinks is appropriate. And the same kind of opportunity may come to arise with the Pond Array Field of Dreams project, which is where the majority of that funding from Pond Array's local option tax is intended to go, is towards, well, on the recreation side, it's towards that Field of Dreams project on the north end of town. And of course, we have yet to see any kind of plan or vision for that yet. So it's really up in the air. They're not as far along in their planning process. I will say that Pond Array, though, with their 1% tax, also is intending to fund a broad array of city services generally. So this is really a different kind of proposal that you have before you today. This is really focused, and we're trying to, at the same time, provide as much focus as we can so that it gives voters the confidence in what they're investing in, but at the same time allow us certain flexibility, knowing that going forward 7 years down the road, things are going to change, opportunities are going to come up, and we need to be able to take advantage of those opportunities as long as they align with the general vision of both the Parks and Rec master plan and of course the vision of this body and the public in general. So I want to bring us back to the proposal in front of us here, and there were a couple of proposals brought up, and in terms of how we could amend the funding priorities that you see before us. We have A through F, and there's other language that we may want to consider here as well, but I would really ask this body to really focus our efforts here and see if we can put ourselves to the task of really refining what we see as the highest and best priorities that we can commit to as a governing body with this local option tax. And also, I would ask that keep in mind, the comments that both myself and Councilwoman Rule brought up in terms of, flexibility. How can we build flexibility into this that allows us to be able to partner with other organizations or opportunities as they come up that are beyond our scope as we see it here today?
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
I would like to point out that I think a little bit of your information is maybe not quite as accurate. Conversations I've had is that the Pond Array lot tax is going to be half for connection to their waterfront and half for their recreation. And I was told firsthand that they would be breaking ground next summer on fields. They aren't doing anything fancy, but they would have be breaking ground on some fields, just to point that out, that is something that has actually finally happening. And then I would like to ask Jennifer, if I could, to be a little bit more specific. We talk about all the funding coming from COVID. I'm assuming that's what she was referring to, infrastructure and whatnot. So again, is that funding only directed at recreation, or is that for infrastructure? Would that be reasonable to match funds again on the division project with the remaking of the street? So I need some more clarification on that funding.
The funding timelines that are coming available, there are specific funding streams and timelines that are related to parks, recreation, and open space projects. There are some other grants we have not seen with any of the ARPA or COVID related funding, that any of it is eligible for transportation. It is eligible for parks, recreation, and open space, as well as stormwater management, which is a component of most of these projects, but not for streets, infrastructure, or necessarily sidewalk infrastructure. Our regular grant cycles are coming up for those particular projects, and Most of that funding, particularly through the state or pass-through federal funding, is coming through LTAC, and we've identified in conjunction with LTAC a number of priority projects that would be competitive for that funding, including the completion of the fill-in of the multimodal trail along Boyer. The Division Street project at this point, relative to the upcoming grant rounds, is not one of the more competitive projects, but we do have some other street and sidewalk projects that will be competitive, and we do anticipate submitting grant applications.
So, thank you, Jennifer. And I would not question you, but question why a street that is relatively unsafe, that houses 3 schools and your public library, would be low on the totem pole as far as having grant money applied to it. It seems like that would be one of the busier streets that would need a lot of safety measures taken. And I guess my last thing that I would like to be an advocate, as I read through many of the survey responses, what type of funding is out there for our housing crisis, and is there any COVID funding for that? And was there any thought put into the local option tax as far as putting on the survey the options for sidewalks, the options for recreation, the options for, I know planning is extremely complicated, but if we have a source of funding and some creative ideas, I don't want to leave that behind us, as I saw many comments when I read through that are gravely concerned about that issue here.
Mr. Mayor, do you want me to?
Yeah, go ahead.
At this point, we're not aware of any COVID specific or grant dollars that we can apply for affordable housing projects. Again, where there is dollars flowing right now that specifically have been COVID related, they have been specific for protective measures, for green open space, recreation, stormwater improvements, and other utility improvements specifically.
And I would add that the mechanism, if the community of Sandpoint wants to invest in, let's say, land for the purpose of building and investing in affordable housing for the community, the tool for that is through an urban renewal agency. And that's certainly something that we can, and I believe should consider. But it's not, and although we could divert funding from a local option tax to support an effort like that, right now we don't have the mechanism in place, the structural mechanism, to be able to actually implement that funding for that purpose.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
where are we gonna just keep on discussing like how we're
Yeah.
gonna?
Yeah,
to-
okay, thank you, Counselor. I would again like to bring us back to the task at hand here. We have a proposed ballot language in front of us with 6 stated priorities. And I would ask the council to please tell us which, if any of these, they believe do not belong on that list, and which of any of these they'd like to add to the list, like namely sidewalks, for instance, or the purchase of the Baldy property. I'd like to refocus our conversation back on our task at hand here this evening. And so with that, please go ahead.
Thank you. So the more I look at this list, the more I think it's too detailed. Would you mind going back to the survey results where it's like the top 4 priorities were highlighted? Like I think it was city beach, waterfront access, trails and connectivity, and I can't remember. Because if I'm looking at that right now and I'm not sitting in the position that I'm sitting in right now, I wouldn't vote for it.
Okay.
You would.
I would not.
You would not. You would not vote for the detailed plan or the 4 priorities?
The detailed plan
Okay,
that was presented as just like something to consider.
okay.
That was a concern of mine as well.
And Mr. Mayor, could
Yeah.
we ask Fonda for some legal help with some rules of engagement on this? I would like to know clearly how we move these things around from, rather than a speculative space, a legal space. So Fonda, if there's anything that you could add to kind of help us along with this list and trying to, what I hear from my other council members, some more flexibility and not such a specific list.
So Idaho Code 50-1047 requires that your resolution specify, as this proposed resolution does. And can you all hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, great. That you identify what exactly you're going to be taxing. So what is the specific tax? What is the rate of tax? And the duration of the tax. And then the other element is the exact purpose for the revenue. Exact purpose for the revenue has not been defined as identifying every specific project. So back to Councilwoman Sherman's question about maybe going back to the top 4 priorities that are articulated a little more generally, that is perfectly acceptable. I mean, for satisfaction of Idaho code, you could simply adopt a resolution that says you are going to utilize the local option tax revenue for the purpose of moving forward in completion and accomplishment of the goals and objectives of the recently adopted Parks Master Plan. So you could be as general as that, although I don't recommend it, or as specific as what's listed here based on the results from the survey. So you have some flexibility to be a little more general, as long as the voters can understand where the revenue is intended to be spent. Second to that, if you'll notice in the resolution put in front of you of the sample ballot, it gives you the list and it says, but not limited to. So that's a little bit of flexibility built into maybe rearrange some things to re-identify that list. I don't want you to get hung up tonight on the specific language of the ballot, because the specific language of the ballot can also be adjusted as needed between now and submission based on advice of legal counsel. So you in your resolution need to give enough clarity for the purpose of the revenue, excuse me, but you don't necessarily have to identify every single independent project.
Is that clear, Counselor?
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Fonda. That was helpful. Yeah, go ahead.
You're welcome.
And that's what my question was earlier, and I probably wasn't clear. That list, it says with that language, we can take the ice rink out of there and put something else with discussion with the community. That's what I was trying to get at, is we have time to discuss what's a priority, not necessarily the vote. I understand that tonight we have to vote on it, but if we vote yes, we can rearrange those numbers, say there are different priorities come up later on. That's what I'm hearing, and that's
And council, before you
Please.
answer, to Councilman Aspiro's point was, it's, if you can back up to the one that's more general than this, not where the dots were spent. So we get the high, no, I think you gotta keep going. Oh, keep going. There was one where it, but like City Beach, like there was like
Yeah,
4 topics. and
Wasn't it? It was 22. You just passed it. I think it was number 22. Slide 22.
Okay, I think that's it. Thank you.
Except mine is Lakeview Park and War Memorial Field.
So this is what I was trying, and I didn't mean to interrupt.
please do. No, you're fine.
Instead of having that detailed list, and I know there's some flexibility built into it, and there's a lot of discussion and concern about flexibility tonight. I would be way more comfortable with, voting on a potential tax, local option tax, if it was a little bit more broad. That way, as grant opportunities come into effect and we see what's being developed in the surrounding community, and like there's all kinds of things that can happen over a 7-year period of time, we have way more flexibility, and we'll have the opportunity to have community input, because which we have learned is very, very, very important. And I think to a voter, if they are kind of pigeonholed, even if it says this list, but also some other things which we haven't discussed, that's all they're limited to, it's not going to be very palatable. Because maybe some people hate ice skating, or they don't like to skateboard, or they hate the water. I don't know. They probably don't hate the water because they live here. But I mean, just there's lots of different examples. So I would be more comfortable incorporating something like this in addition to sidewalks. I don't think that's very specific. I agree, that, we've had discussions, that's how we created a priority network, but if it, there's another emergency that rises to the top that exists outside of that priority network, they have the flexibility to address that. I'm not going to walk away from including sidewalks, but I think if we're going to consider our parks master plan, I don't think it should be as broad as like anything in the parks master plan is go, because that's not going to fly either. But to just kind of broaden it out a little bit in terms of like what we envisioned or what the community envisioned, what's in our in the concepts. Those things that have been identified for City Beach, the downtown waterfront, and that includes a lot of things, not just, specific features, but stormwater treatment. It just broadens, I think, the possibilities of what $12 million could accomplish over 7 years. That's it.
Agreed. So Councilwoman Sherman, I happen to like the other screen that we went with that has, and Baldy property is at the top of that list. I'm not saying that that's the top of my list, but this one has those 4 components. Well, it's got the Baldy property, trail conductivity, which could, another line item would be sidewalks, and then public waterfront and water access. Those are in, as I read it and have read the surveys, they are general enough yet specific that I think a voter could feel comfortable with. This is where these things are going to go. So I don't know if there's individual, I think that there might be some, I don't know, that might even be maybe too specific. I don't know. And so I'd like to get your guys' input, like the.
Good.
Are you looking, is there a particular slide that you're reading off of there?
Yeah,
20?
Unfortunately, let's see.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
That one right there.
Okay.
So it has Baldy property, trail connectivity, public waterfront and water access, and then to include your proposed sidewalks.
It looks
But
like
I'm looking at this,
don't support.
yeah, that the majority of the people don't support the Baldy property. So I'm confused.
Well, right, and this was where I was going to hope for some clarification, because there was some, when you add the the strongly, the important, and the very, that equals 50%. So
56.
right, so, and that's where I'm not a statistician. I
Mhm.
just disagreed with some of the findings. So I found that if you
Fair
did if you added similarly, like some of the other graphs we had where they included the important, very important, most important, that took it over 50%. Well, if you do that with this, they get over, you have 56%, 55%, and 54% compared to the 40, 46, and 45%. So again, we're splitting hairs here. And again, I'm only bringing this up to generalize this a little bit more than that specific list that was presented to us before.
Right. I totally understand your point, but again, this is even too specific for me. Going back to the top 4, that's kind of where my comfort zone is in terms of flexibility and what the future may hold in terms of all kinds of variables, which we have no idea about. So that's just kind of, that's just where I'm at,
But including sidewalks.
but including sidewalks. Yes.
Yeah, so I think I hear you saying, and maybe it's worth specifying here. So we could just say this money will be used for the purpose of implementing the Parks and Rec Master Plan, but maybe half the voters out there really have no idea what that even means, right?
Mhm.
So if we say these 3 items are basically make up the bulk of the master plan,
Mhm.
downtown waterfront, the sports complex, Sand Creek water, maybe watershed comes out of there because because funding for trails and recreation in the watershed can be found outside of the local option tax. Those are relatively small dollar investments. But then at the same time, there's a strong user group there. So
Mhm.
maybe that gets left in, but to your point, Counselor, include sidewalk and connectivity in there,
Sidewalks specifically.
sidewalk specifically.
And I don't think War Memorial Field necessarily needs to be in there, as Jennifer
Nor
pointed
Lakeview
out.
Park.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, Lakeview Park, I can see there's a lot of potential for improvement there, and obviously it was of interest to a lot of people, but with respect to Memorial Field, we've been able to leverage the dollars from the first local option tax really, really well. And I think that that can be capped off using other types of funds. But if we broaden it out to include, those City Beach, downtown waterfront, the things in the top three. I know that there's a lot of things that tied for the top two, and not prioritizing them, not saying that this is coming first in the ballot, so this is what we're going to spend our money on, but just like we're going to leverage opportunities that come up across all of these categories with a set aside for sidewalks.
Mr. Mayor, if I can.
Yeah,
What I'm hearing is how can we, within our legal rights, come to a language we can all agree on that'll be broad enough or narrow enough to work on it in the next few years to decide where we're gonna use the money, so we could all be happy and move forward. That's what I'm hearing.
yeah, that's what we're doing.
And the public would understand.
Correct. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so Counselor Sherman, I appreciate those comments. So if we were to recraft this and basically eliminate A through G and replace them with A, downtown waterfront, B, Traverse Centennial Great Northern Sports Complex, C, Sand Creek Watershed Recreational Trails, D, sidewalks, and then E, in investment in or purchase of properties in accordance with the vision of the Parks and Rec Master Plan.
Mr. Mayor, I think you missed City Beach also.
City Beach would be A. I would
Yep.
think.
So I think that encapsulates everything that I'm hearing up here, and it gives us the most amount of flexibility. It lets the voters know what we're doing without, getting bogged down in the details.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
And Jennifer, I think I remember correctly that purchase of property was generally favored, and with it,
Is about 50%.
Well, 56, if you include those who are on the fence.
but was it
Yeah.
related to waterfront, or I can't remember?
Yeah, maybe you can go back to that slide.
I'll pull it up.
Just, that was the general question, I think, of, are you in favor of the city using these funds to purchase property? I don't remember if it was specific to waterfront or not.
Mhm. I don't remember either.
Got all night. Let's look it up.
I think it's important to include that, and there may be some detail or caveat there that's important too, but I'm hearing from a couple of the counselors that it's important to have that option in there. It still gives this body time to make a final determination on what to do with Baldy. It may not be Baldy, maybe it's some other property, but as stated in the Parks and Rec Master Plan, if we're to be able to continue to maintain the same level of service going forward, at some point, we're going to have to purchase property so that we have the same, number of acres per people going forward. That may be Baldy, it may be some other property, it may be waterfront down on Sand Creek, who knows? But it gives this body flexibility going forward to make those decisions as they come up. And I think that's where we want to be.
I just wanted to see, I couldn't remember what the split was, but thank you.
And maybe, this is Fonda, maybe you could add, after your list that you just went through, opportunities for purchase of open space / recreational property.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Fonda, would that be restricted to, though, using the open space for recreational opportunities?
Well, because these sub-elements are under an overarching mission of accomplishing the goals and objectives of the Parks Recreation Master Plan, yes.
So that if I heard some talk about Baldy Mountain and housing, would that affect that, Fonda? Say
So
we bought the property with these funds, and then the city decided later on in the future they wanted to build whatever affordable housing means, but on that property. Would that be a conflict there?
If you put to the voters an opportunity for a local option tax that is designed in the ballot towards the completion of a recreation master plan, and all of these sub goals, if you will, are directed that way, with the exception of the sidewalks, then that is what the property purchases would need to be for, is recreation and or moving the master plan forward, the recreation master plan.
And so what if a portion of property, let's say a 32-acre portion of property, parcel of property is purchased for recreation, but it also is purposed partially for another use?
As long as you accomplish the goals and what was set out in this ballot that's put to the voters as well.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
I'd actually like Councilwoman McAllister's expertise, if you don't mind, of more of the unintended consequences. It's kind of connected with, I think it was 70 comments that were concerned about the taxes, with the locals being taxed as well. You deal a lot with businesses and business owners. We're producing a product that's going to help a lot of tourists and also the locals as well, but obviously bring in more people, especially since COVID, we've all seen an influx of visitors. But it's also created a big stress on local business owners, restaurants, whether it's not finding enough employees or just not even really keep up and kind of lose their sanity. Have you, talking to business owners, experience like maybe we're almost too busy in our town to keep up with everything?
Well, it's, being too busy brings in more income to
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
business owners such as yourself. I would say more so that they're burnt out from working so much.
Correct.
But when I talked to several of them about the local option tax, they were fine with it as long as we were, specific. And most of them had answered the survey, whether it was anonymously or whether it was, they put their name down. But I really think that, well, and again, you can speak to this yourself, is that they're just tired.
Yeah.
I mean, the money has been great, but as we all know, living where we live, money isn't always everything.
Right.
It's about spending time with our families and ideal situations such as that. But I haven't heard any of them say they're too busy. I've heard them say more often that they're tired.
Yeah. I appreciate your perspective.
And I feel tired for them.
I guess the second one was I don't feel like we've addressed really well the concerns about, locals being taxed more, and the concern there maybe with the sidewalk connectivity, using that money to help locals more, saying, hey, this money's not just for tourists, but also how can we use this money to lessen the burden with taxes with our locals? And I don't have an answer. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't feel we've addressed those 70 comments, which were the overwhelming majority of concern. So, love to hear your thoughts if you want. And maybe I'm wrong on the 70 comments. Like, that's what I thought I remember.
Yeah, that's what it was.
I would concur with Councilman Espiro that I don't know that we've addressed that concern.
Mr. Mayor,
Yeah.
the large number of comments, it was 70 looking at.
To be fair, some of that, they could not understand this thing. And I just want to be clear on that, but I also want to just address it. But there could just be some misunderstanding on the tax.
The 70 comments that you are speaking to, those comments were related to a lack of support for a local option tax, and noting specifically that the tax that residents end up paying that local option tax as well. And then frequently the comment with it again was that residents feel that they're being taxed, and these park amenities really benefit the tourists,
Right.
opposed to the tourists paying for amenity benefiting the resident. In that group of 70, that wasn't as much the business owners concerned about collection of that tax. That was in that smaller number of comments that was in the bottom, but the sentiment of the 70 write-in comments that we got were related to a lack of support of a local option tax.
And maybe it's worth reiterating that if we didn't have a local option tax, any capital improvements that we would contemplate as a city would come entirely out of the general fund. That means they would be paid for 100%, barring grants and whatnot, which we would continue to seek, but we would have less ability to seek because we wouldn't have as much leverage. So all of that money would come solely from property taxes. That's only from people living within the city limits that own property would be paying for all capital improvements. So the beauty of a local option tax is it gives us the opportunity to leverage all those outside dollars. There's 40,000 other people out there just in our county that come here every day, and they use City Beach. They use our roads, our sidewalks, all of our parks. They go to Memorial Field. They use our facilities, and they don't pay for it. You know, with the exception of some user fees, which there are user fees that pay for some maintenance and operations to some degree, but all capital improvement will come exclusively from property taxes. And that means that we wouldn't be able to do something like the Parks Master Plan or many other, ideas that we have in terms of capital improvements in our city, because we just wouldn't have the funding. So the local option tax gives us the ability to leverage all those outside dollars, the 40,000 people out there in the county and the 250,000 people that come here every year to recreate on the lake, and they come to Schweitzer and they come downtown and enjoy all of our beautiful community, and they spend money at our local shops, at our restaurants, at our hotels, gas stations, right? And 1 cent out of every dollar, out of all those dollars, goes towards what we're proposing here today. And I think it's really important to hit that point home, because yes, while we also shop in town every day and every year, we shop in town and we pay that 1%, we're adding 2 or 3 extra 1 cents out there from all those tourists and all those visitors and all those county residents and all those Kootenai County residents and Spokane residents that come here every day and use our facilities and spend money here. And so they're joining the effort here to improve our capital facilities. And I think, we need to remember that. The other thing I wanted to say about that is, we talk about affordability and we talk about access, right? We talk about healthy activity. And I'm sorry if anything I said offended anyone. I think it's a fact that if we promote opportunities and access to recreational opportunities and access to open spaces, that we are doing our part to improve community health. And while yes, by investing in a park isn't going to cure somebody of depression, and it's not necessarily going to cure somebody from heart disease, it's the little things that we do in our community that make a big difference. And they make a big difference every day and every week and every year from this point forward with those investment dollars. So these are important investments that we're making for community health, and not just health, but joy of living here, opportunities for us to come together and gather in places with family and friends and coworkers and enjoy the community that we live in. So that's what we're doing here. And I think that what we're doing by providing the opportunity for the public to vote on something like this, if it were approved, it improves that access for those who would not otherwise be able to afford it. You know, most people in this community can't afford a ski pass up at Schweitzer. Most people in this community can't afford to have a boat slip and a boat on the lake, okay? Most people can't afford to, you know, drive down to Post Falls and go ice skating when they want to go ice skating, okay? The only way that they're going to have opportunities like that is if we invest in our community, is if we ask our visitors and the people that live around us to help us invest in our community so we can improve that kind of access to recreation and healthy lifestyle for all of our citizens.
Mr. Mayor, two things. One, once we reach 10,000, we're not able to get a local option tax anymore. Is that correct, Jennifer?
That is correct.
Right. So this, you know, at the next census, we are more than likely going to be over 10,000 people. I'm surprised that we're not now, right? And also, I also want people to think about taking things in context, because when I hear, oh my gosh, the tourists are everywhere. Yes, they are, but really they're mostly visible at City Beach. And that's absolutely true. It's hard to find a Sandpoint license plate in the parking lot, but I live close to Memorial Park or Memorial Field in Lakeview. And mostly I see locals in those parks. I don't see a lot of tourists using those parks. And also, you know, and I don't know about Travers, but I know a lot of local kids who go spend time there. So keeping it in context from the people who say tourists are overrunning our parks, I really think it's focused on City Beach because that's where they're the most visible. That's just in my opinion, but you know, we have to really take things in context too. It's like when somebody says, well, everybody says that. Well, who's everybody? You know, and what does that mean? And so to me, that's what it means is that, you know, the tourists seeing all the tourists is really probably about City Beach. And I think that's another issue to take up is, you know, charging user fees to out-of-staters or you know, people in the county that we pay for it all here in Sandpoint. So.
Thank
So
you.
it looks as though this has been redrawn up. Has anybody sorry, go ahead.
I didn't mean to interrupt you. Staff, there was a D in here that was sidewalks that Councilman Sherman brought up, and it seemed like we had general consensus.
Mr. Mayor, I have that as a separate paragraph. So with design and construction of the site plan concepts in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan, identifying 3 of the 4 site plan concepts. So the 4th that is not included here would be War Memorial Field. And then separately to purchase property or open space, parks and recreation, and then 3rd, to support implementation of the city's pedestrian priority network.
I apologize. I didn't see that. Thank you. Sorry.
No, that's it. I just, have we had an opportunity to read through how this has been redrafted?
Are there any comments or in particular recommended changes? Okay. Seems like yes.
Mr. Mayor, there are a few members of the public
Oh.
participating who are chatting. I didn't know if you were going to give them an opportunity to speak or if the survey was that opportunity.
Yeah, let's hear from the public.
If there's any member of the public participating on Zoom who would like to speak to this matter, please raise your hand. There is no one raising a
Okay,
hand who
thank you.
wishes to speak.
Mr. Mayor, I think there may be someone in chambers that may wish to.
Is there anyone here in the public that President would like to speak? Okay. Whoa. You need to step up to the dais and, okay, please state your name. And,
Maddox, Sagal, Idaho,
okay.
1710 Lignite Road. How did City Beach, just from the survey, became #1 on where to appropriate the money for the 1% tax?
It was it received the most number of responses on the survey.
And then my other question is, why are we buying property at the highest point right now when we had other property that probably could have been bought at a lesser amount? Why are we securing property now
We're not.
at the highest
We're
or
not.
considering? Okay, we're not. And then Baldy property. I read something where you said it was valued at $1 or $2 million. One, I think that's high. And then why would we have to purchase it from Sandpoint Sewer? And where would we make room for more toilets in the city to flush? Like if the sewer owns that, I think we have to look ahead and say like, how are these people, how is our sewer infrastructure going to be expanded? And save property for that as well.
Okay. Is that all?
And I think the number one priority is affordable housing, because if I have rentals and 26 people make a phone call on one rentals. That's how bad our situation is up here.
Okay, thank you.
And affordable is probably 600 and under, not 1,000 for a 1-bedroom. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, so to be clear, we're not proposing, this isn't a decision to purchase any property right now, but it directs how funds would be used in the future. If we were to pass this, if the public in November were to pass this local option tax, it would give this body going forward the ability to use those funds to purchase property if and when it was deemed appropriate and if it aligned with the purpose of the plan here. So, and I agree with you that affordable housing is a top priority. And that's an issue that also needs to be addressed and dealt with separately than the issue before us right now. Would you like to speak as well? And please, just for the record, state your name and whether or not you reside in the city. And if you can keep it to 3 minutes, that'd be great.
Yes, Clay Hutchison. I do live in the city, and I first want to compliment the council for some very well thought out comments coming from different perspectives from all of you. And I think, in looking at the revision to the proposed thing from a citizen perspective, I think you did exactly what you needed to do, which was to broaden it, at the same time put in some specifics and narrow the focus of this. Just this evening, we've talked about over 100 plus, maybe it's close to $200 million worth of needs we have in the city. We have a lot of needs. This is not going to address all those needs. It's going to address a small chunk of it and give the ability to leverage this. And I think you've brought in some very good perspectives on that. The sidewalks one is one, the Baldy is another. Life is a little bit like Monopoly. If you let that property go, you won't get it back. So however that happens, whether it's part of this or some other initiatives, let's try and not lose that property, because that's I'd love to have it as a developer, but it should be, if you already have it, let's keep it in the city. And the sidewalks is not a particularly sexy thing, but it's an important thing. And in working with the carousel, because I'm spearheading that, we know the power of numbers and the power of passion that can get things done. And so when you have some of the specifics like the dog park, which a lot of people want the dog park, a lot of people don't want the dog park, but there is some tremendous passion among those that want the dog park. And so the private-public partnership for that kind of an aspect is huge. And those funds don't necessarily have to come out of the 1% tax, but there may be a way to incorporate some of that so that you can leverage that to get that done, along with the pickleball and those other very passionate things where you have groups that have the ability to join in on that. And where some of the other passionate things where you might have groups such as the skate park, well, maybe that particular group doesn't quite have the ability to figure out to bring their own funds. So I do think you're on the right track. Let's pass this thing. It's one of the tools that we need as a city. You spoke very eloquently about that the time is to get this done and not keep kicking that can down the road. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments. Anyone else? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, because I'm here on Zoom, I can see that some people have written a couple of comments in the chat box, and one gentleman has pointed out that he doesn't have a camera or a microphone on the computer. They are 1 or 2 sentences long. If you wanted Melissa to read those to the council, or I would be willing to do that.
Yeah, clerk, Madam Clerk, would you mind?
Not at all.
Thank you, Counselor Rule. Appreciate that.
So there was a member of the public who indicated that he does not have a camera microphone at his computer. And he said that he personally wanted the proposal to be very specific. A loose or flexible plan just sounds like a money grab. I don't want to vote for a pig in the poke. I want a plan in all caps.
Is that it?
That was
Okay.
his comment.
All right, thank you.
There was one more woman who also made a comment just above that.
There was a comment from Molly McCann. She states our parks are already sufficient. Our locals and low-income residents need housing critically. They currently have parks, not housing.
Okay, thank you for those comments. At this point, I will entertain a motion to approve the resolution for the local option tax election, November 2nd, 2021, as amended. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion?
Mr. Mayor, just one
Yes.
very minor point. When the language is being finalized, it'd be great if you could emphasize that the list of items is not in terms of priority, as we've already seen tonight, that was misinterpreted. So I don't know what that needs to read like, and maybe Fonda will be helpful with that, but just to emphasize that these are just all of the things that we're going to consider.
It's a great point, Counselor. Thank you. Any further comments? This will be a roll call vote.
Councilwoman Sherman,
Yes.
Councilwoman Rule,
No,
Councilman Spuro,
I'd just like to say real quick, to the money grab, I do trust this council in the future to make sure they do what's best for the citizens. So although I can sympathize with that concern, I do believe we'll make the best and right decision. So yes.
Councilwoman McAllister,
Yes.
Councilman Groot.
Yes.
Motion passes and this meeting is adjourned. Nice work, everyone. Thank you.